Continuous improvement comes in lots of different flavors and styles. I'm Bella Engelbach, and I'm inviting you to journey with me to the edges of lean. Episode 133, Meetings That Don't Suck, with Jonathan Vehar and Cathi Brese Doebler. One of the things that frankly drives me crazy about how people think about continuous improvement is a focus on cost savings rather than increasing productivity and engagement. So I was really excited to chat with Jonathan Vehar and Cathi Brese Doebler about a brilliant method to increase productivity, drive engagement, and save money, and something you can do every single day. They joined me to talk about their new book, How to Make Meetings Not Suck. Listen in and consider how their approach might enhance every meeting, from your daily morning huddle to those 3-day leadership retreats. Jonathan Vehar and Cathi Brese Doebler, welcome to the Edges of Lean.
It's great to be here. Thanks, Bella.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm so glad to have you. And Jonathan, it's nice to see you again. For those of you who are listening to the show, Jonathan and I go a few years back. I think not as many years back as you go back with Cathi, but I had the pleasure of actually being a client of Jonathan's several years ago. I learned a lot. And for those of you who have read my book, you'll see Jonathan's name mentioned a couple of times in my book. So you're famous, at least among the 5 people who've read my book.
I would, as long as it's not infamous, I'm okay with that.
That's great. So Jonathan and Cathi, could you please tell us a little bit about yourselves and what is it that you do?
Sure. Cathi, you want to go first?
Sure. So a little bit about myself. I'm located in New York State, and my whole career has basically been about developing leaders. Sometimes I got to do that when I was working within an organization. Sometimes I got to do that in the consultant perspective. And the beginning of my career really started in the creative problem-solving world, and that's how Jonathan and I got connected. So like you mentioned before, we've known each other since, I would say, mid-90s. So a long time. We don't want to date ourselves too much here, but it's been a while that we've been colleagues and have shared work together as well. So the blessing that I felt I got out of that was the creative problem-solving tools that I learned early on in my career are tools I've been able to use throughout my whole career as I got into more of the leadership development space. So really enjoy that and appreciate that that was a great start for me to bring into my career later on. Jonathan?
Yeah. So very similar to Cathi, and our careers have sort of paralleled each other's for the last several decades. My career has always been around developing people, developing leaders. Cathi and I met at a place called the Creative Education Foundation, where we're doing work around creative problem solving, innovation, facilitation. That sort of morphed into a real interest and a fascination with leadership, and it's really turned into a real big interest in strategy and accountability, and doing that for a number of different organizations. I had the opportunity to be a chief product officer at the Dale Carnegie organization globally, so working to help develop people around the globe. And more recently, Cathi and I have been doing a lot of work with the with the Center for Creative Leadership. Who do we work for again? And also our own practices as well. And that's just been a lot of fun. And that's given us the opportunity to work with organizations like Daimler Chrysler, now Stellantis, Subaru, T. Rowe Price, National Grid, Cardinal Health, lots of big organizations, as well as small organizations that no one's ever heard of. And that really is what keeps us occupied, is working with people to help them be more effective in doing the jobs that they need to do.
Wow. And I mean, just hear you talk about it, I can kind of hear like the joy and sort of the fun, right? And I think, a lot of times work is serious. We have serious things to do. We have vehicles to deliver, our lives to save, or, books to get out in the market, whatever the business is. And it's very, very serious. But
it's interesting. One of the things that we talk about in the book is the whole notion of suggestions for working together, in terms of what are some of the things that people need to do in order to be productive together. And number one on our list is have fun. And and it's act respectfully, listen generously, look for what's possible, acknowledge and appreciate, be coachable, things like that. And it used to be that have fun was at the end, and it's like, oh, do all these things, and oh, by the way, have fun too. What we realized is that if you start with having fun, all of those other things just happen naturally. People start behaving the way that they should. They act as friends, they're coachable, they listen to each other. And so that having fun it seems like it's sort of a secondary benefit, but when we're paying attention to that, all the other stuff happens naturally, which is kind of cool.
I love it. So you mentioned the book, and you're here to tell us about your book. So Cathi, could you give us like a quick rundown of, first of all, what's the book called? And Jonathan's holding it up for those of you who are watching on YouTube. Yeah, that's the right way up, Jonathan. So Cathi, go ahead.
Yes, thank you for modeling that. You're doing a wonderful job, Jonathan. It's called How to Make Meetings Not Suck. And that was a fun title. Of course, Jonathan, we had lots of fun just coming up with the title for the book. Not even counting actually writing the book together. But really, what we wanted to do is we wanted to address a need that we saw out there. So many people really dislike going to meetings because they go to meetings that aren't run effectively, or they're the ones running the meetings and they don't know how to do it effectively. And so we were hearing that these underpinnings in conversations throughout our work with our organizations we were working with, and different people bringing this up. And we started to notice a trend. And years ago, we had done some work on putting ideas together for how to run meetings effectively and some tools and all that. And we decided, why don't we do an actual book on this that really captures all the stuff we've observed, we've learned, and all that. So before we started writing, we first did some research. We reached out and did some surveys where we asked lots of questions around, what kinds of meetings are effective? What do you see happening in those meetings? Or what do you really dislike about meetings? What really sticks with you when you leave a meeting and you dislike something about it? So we got lots of insight from other people. And then we tied that in throughout the book, along with all of the tools that we've learned over the years and that we apply all the time when we work with organizations.
And the book has just come out, right? So it's available. People can get that wherever they get their books.
That's right.
Yep.
And it has a nice bright yellow cover, so you can't miss it. People will.
Yep. And
I need the yellow book.
Yes. And it's got that paper like crunched up in the middle. So if you can't see that on camera, that's what that is a piece of paper.
A piece of paper. That's all right.
Yeah.
All right. So, so in the lean world, we like to see people actually doing the work that they're hired to do, right? That like one of the things that we want to do is get people back to doing the work that they're hired to do. And for people who are doing, physical work, you're working in a plant and you're making a thing, or maybe you're in a development lab and you're inventing a new thing, coming up with prototypes, designing something like that. That's really, we want people to be able to do that. And so we emphasize, doing a 15-minute daily huddle, trying to minimize the number of meetings, those kinds of things. But there's this other kind of work that people do, which is where people are working on something, they're working on it together, but it's more intellectual. And I don't mean that the other kind of work isn't intellectual, but it's not physical work, right? It's not making a thing. It's not designing a thing, working in a computer. And I think that kind of work really can end up becoming nothing but back-to-back meetings.
Yep.
As people discuss the things that they're trying to develop. I mean, that was certainly something that I experienced in my previous life working in industry. And so then the sense of, I can't get any work done because I have all these meetings.
Yep.
It's just awful, because then you're going home and doing it at night. Or if you're working at home, you're doing that stuff in the daytime and then staying at your desk at night. And so why does that happen?
Yeah, it's interesting. And so I had an executive team role at a global organization. And when I started there, it was the same frustration. It rapidly became like every single minute of my work and then some was taken up with meetings. Like literally, I would start the day on a Zoom call at 7 a.m. And end the call or end the day on a different Zoom call, but nonstop wall-to-wall Zoom calls at 7 p.m. And it was kind of like, well, when do I get the job done? And what we ended up doing, we got some really good coaching. We had some good mentoring. And one of the things that helped us was figuring out like, what is the right cadence of meetings, starting with the daily huddle that you talked about. What's the right cadence so that if you've got regular meetings scheduled in, oddly enough, it makes the other informal, like emergency meetings, drop away, right? And so one of the things that we talk about in the book is a cadence that's that other people have talked about, but it's a daily huddle to figure out like, what are the immediate things that we need to deal with right now, or what are we dealing with today? It's the weekly or bi-weekly to ensure that the team knows how are we doing against our key goals, right? Both the metrics and the timelines. The monthly meetings, it's really paying attention to like problem solving that we need to dig into at depth. And then the quarterly things that are focused on the strategic, the more high level issues that we need to deal with. And so getting into sort of that cadence of like, look, we know we're going to be dealing with these issues at this time. We can structure that stuff. And that made so many other meetings drop away that created more freedom. So that it wasn't like, well, I've got to meet with Jonathan and I see he has an availability like 6 weeks from now, which was true. And that helps a lot.
Yeah, and then by the time that 6 weeks comes around, you have the meeting on the calendar, and maybe the need's not there, but you're still gonna meet, right? And then because
exactly, it's like, why are we meeting?
When am I gonna talk to Jonathan again? Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah. So can we talk about agendas?
Yes.
Tell me about agendas because one thing I tell you, I hate making agendas. I just hate it.
Really?
Yeah.
Why do you
I do it, Cathi.
Yeah.
But I really can't stand it. And that is maybe it's because of maybe a little bit of like, I don't know. I just want to be open to something might come up that needs to be addressed. Maybe I'm just not being firm enough. But
it also could be just, I feel like sometimes people aren't sure what to include. That might not be your case, but in some cases, people who don't like agendas, they don't really know what they should be putting in it or what the point of it is, right? And so we actually talk in our book about a concept called a power agenda. And
I love that.
And the idea is to be purposeful when you're having that meeting, to not just walk into it's the worst when you go into a meeting and you get there and people say, well, what are we here to do again? That is like you just described. It's the worst. So you need to be thinking ahead of time about valuing and respecting people's time. And that's where the power agenda is a wonderful tool that you can use to really prepare people for the meeting so they know what's coming in case they have to bring something or think about something ahead of time. And it also helps them to know what their roles are. So there's several things that you want to include. First of all, you want to break down whatever you want to talk about by duration. So imagine that you only have 30 minutes that you can set aside to talk about something and you have 4 topics. You can't do all 4 topics 15 minutes, right? So breaking it up and giving some slotted times, the duration that you really want to stick to for that meeting. Then when you get into the meeting, you can call people on that and say, you know what, we have only about 2 minutes left for this topic. How are we doing on this? So you can use it as a tool to manage your time. So that's one of the things that you include in that power agenda. Another part that you want to include is the owner. So whoever has the issue, who really owns it outside of that meeting, that person's name is next to it. They're the person who might want to introduce it. They might be the final decision maker. But what is it that they own around that issue that you're bringing up? And it could be that they're different from the decision maker. The owner might have to get this task done, but the decision maker might be somebody else, not them. And they're the ones trying to get something moved along to help the decision maker. You might have a scribe, for example, somebody who's documenting the meeting, typing up the notes, making sure you capture anything that gets decided in the meeting. So there's different roles that you would include when you create this power agenda. You've got, what are we talking about? How long do we want to talk about it? And who are the people that should be here? And what are their roles? Are just some examples of things that you would include in a power agenda.
Yeah. I think the other thing that is really critical in that power agenda is the notion of what is the process, right? So many times people say, we're going to talk about productivity. How are we going to do that? Well, have a discussion. Careful. Whenever I see the discussion word, it's just like, oh, that's just time wasted. It's okay if we need to understand, like, what are the issues? It's okay to understand, like, we're going to do some, brainstorming to really figure out what are the specific possible solutions. But for me, it's about being really clear about what are the meeting techniques or the tools that we're going to use in order to get that thing done, in order to achieve the purpose. Because if we just wander in there and say, hey, let's talk about productivity, oh my gosh, right? Somebody's going to hijack the meeting. Somebody's going to, they're going to just go off and talk forever. And we have no real way of accomplishing our goal unless we have a specific process detailed.
So, and it's not just process, right, Jonathan? It's also, and Cathi, I think you were alluding to this as well. It's more than having a noun on the agenda, right? You want to have some indication of the outcome that you're aiming for, right? So Absolutely. If we're going to talk about productivity, do we want to talk about last month's dip in productivity, and what might we do to change that? How might we address that as opposed to just productivity?
Yeah,
Which,
we talk about.
I would need to go get coffee if you brought that, if that was on the agenda. I'd be out of the room.
I'm pretty sure I'd leave. We talk about 3 Ps in the power agenda, among some of the other things, and it's the purpose. What's the purpose of it? What's the process? And then what's the product? Which is just what you're talking about, Bella. What is the outcome? What do we need to walk out of here with in order for us to feel like we spent our time wisely? Because if it's just a discussion and everyone walks away and there's no alignment, no agreement, no next steps, it's just like, why bother?
What's funny too is a lot of times I'll hear people, when I even bring up the word agenda, I'll hear people say, I don't have time to write an agenda before the meetings I attend, right? And so it's about perspective, right? Another P word, another perspective is that it's short-term versus long-term. So if you take the time to put together that power agenda, it does take time to do that ahead of time, but then think about the meeting and how much more effective it's going to be, because people have clarity on what they're supposed to bring to the meeting. They have clarity on what their role is, what the process is that you're using, and when they're leaving. So you have a lot of clarity gets created for them when you create that ahead of time, and ideally send it to them ahead of time so that they have time to prepare. Because you may have some asks on that power agenda. You might have some things on that they're asking them to come prepared to talk about. Instead of spending time in that meeting reading a document or going over something they could have done before they got there, your time is better invested. So anytime somebody says to me, I don't have time for that, I really want to encourage you to think about, are you thinking long-term focus or are you thinking short-term focus right now? Because it could be that if you really take that time, it will make a longer impact, a better impact in the long run for you, and save you time.
One of the frameworks that we talk about in the book is the notion of before, during, and after. And so often we think of the meeting as like the during, like we're going to show up and we're going to do stuff and magically we'll accomplish our goals. And if we're not thinking about it beforehand, then the meeting will not be efficient or probably effective. And if we're not doing something afterwards, then frequently the meeting was just time spent, which is lovely. And we use the analogy in the book. It's kind of like if you're going to plan a party and you don't think about like the music and the beverages and the food and where people are going to sit and what they're going to do, you wouldn't just say, hey, Bella, Cathi, everybody come on over Friday night. And then people show up and it's like, oh, I wonder if I have anything in the refrigerator. Right. And it's just like, well, I've got a half a container of flat orange soda, some mustard, and a rotten head of lettuce. Like, it's not going to be a great party. So, we have to think about like, what's the planning work that needs to happen? You wouldn't host a party without doing some thinking about it in terms of all of those sorts of things. And it's the same thing for a meeting. And yet so often it's kind of like, oh my gosh, my meeting just ended. Where do I have to be next? You rush in and it's like, I guess I called this meeting. I wonder what I'm going to do now.
Right. And you're mentally switching from that previous activity. Yeah. And then right after that meeting, you're going to do that mental switch again, and you're going to go on to the next activity. And it's so interesting when you said, like, if you don't have the after, what's going to happen after? You've just wasted that 30 minutes or hour, or God forbid, 2-3 hours in that meeting. And so one of the things that you talk about in the book that I thought was really interesting was, let's figure out, how much do meetings cost us? Like, what's the financial investment in a meeting? So what did you learn when you looked into that?
Yeah, we did a little bit of math, and there's a great table. Well, I think it's an interesting table in the chart, which I always wondered where it came from. And one of our grad school professors pointed out that this is something. Once upon a time, she used to have it was a DOS-based system that every time people would walk into a meeting, they would enter their name, which then pulled out their average cost based on their salary, average cost per hour, and then it would tally the cost of the meeting as it went along. Right. And so, we talk about, for example, if you've got 7 people in the room who make on average, let's call it $100,000, that means that the cost per hour to the organization is $350. Right. And so think about it is if you caught one of your employees stealing $350 from the company, would you fire them? You probably would. Or if you had 5 meetings a week, don't ask me to do that math. 4 meetings a week would be $1,400. If they stole $1,400 from the company, would you fire them? And so the cost of the meetings adds up so quickly, right? And so that's the thing that you take a look at the hourly rate on average of the people in the meeting, and that cost just starts to multiply really quickly.
We also
Wow.
thought that was a lot that we heard from the surveys too. When we asked people about what were some of their frustrations with meetings, people would bring up, I know it's costing the organization a ton of money, even for the shorter meetings that we're having, because maybe we are inviting too many people to the meeting, or we're inviting the wrong people to the meeting, or we're not doing an agenda and preparing people for the meeting. And all of that impacts the cost that Jonathan was just talking about as well.
Yeah, you think about the cost of the organization of 5 1-hour meetings per day, right? 4 days a week over 48 weeks, that's $336,000. And so many of those meetings are not profitable. And that what we heard from folks was that like a lot of their meetings just really suck. And what we found out, which is fascinating, which was like, what do you do if the meeting sucks? And about half the people just tune out. Right. And they're doing something else. And if we're virtual, then I'm just checking email, but I'm staring at the screen, but I'm not paying attention to the meeting. I'm checking email.
Right. Or you're just like, you know what? I need to turn my video off for a minute.
Exactly right. Or I'm checking I'm checking stuff under the table on my phone. And so half the people tune out. We also found that about 40% of the people will offer suggestions. Well, hey, Bella, maybe we could talk about this, or hey, Bella, maybe we could do that. And 12% of the people just flat out try and take over. And some of those people may be in this call. I don't know, but it is one of those things that, and then we've got a power struggle in the room, and that doesn't help.
That's not good.
No.
But what you're talking about, so when you talk about the process, Cathi and Jonathan, you're talking about facilitation skills, right? The ability to move a group of people from point A to point B. And, a lot of the folks listening to this show, I know, have a lot of training on, some cases, maybe a little bit of training in facilitation skills, but it's not something that the average team leader or manager, supervisor gets trained in. And there's a lot of things that people don't get trained in. And I would say facilitation is probably, pretty high on that list of things that people could benefit from, but they don't get trained. So what would you offer to someone who is just starting out, with the, it's dawning on them now that me sitting there and telling people stuff isn't working. I need to be able to help people make decisions together or provide input, but not have one person talk the whole conversation, or whatever it is. What would you suggest to folks as a way to get started with that?
One thought I have is just to acknowledge with their team, for example, if they're going to swap up how they're doing meetings from how they did them in the past, and they're going to try some new things, is to just be really transparent with their team about what they're trying to do. Acknowledge it and say, I think maybe I've been structuring our meetings in ways that aren't as effective. I'm going to try some new things. I'm going to ask us maybe, for example, to take turns being a facilitator, or I'm going to ask us to take turns being a scribe. We're going to use this process. I'd like to get your feedback. So just tell people what you're trying so they understand, especially if you've got those regular meetings and you're trying to improve those. People will appreciate that because, again, it's about respecting their time. And when you talk about trying to improve the process and doing it so it's better for all of you, people know that you are being respectful of their time. So that's the first step that I would suggest.
Yeah. And building on that, one of the frameworks that we talk about in the book, which came from our colleagues at an organization called Pilgrimage Professional Development Group, is what we call the acronym is CIDR, which thinks about like, what's the purpose of the meeting? Right. And so CIDR is the acronym. The C stands for connect, right? Are we just here to get to know each other, to understand our roles, to try and figure out like, who is Cathi, who is Bella, what do they bring to the table? So connecting is important. The I stands for inform, right? Is this a meeting to just dump information on folks, to let them know what's going on and maybe have some Q&A? The D stands for debate, right? Is this something where we've got some different possibilities, some different potentials, and we need to engage in the conversation around which of those solutions makes the most sense? What are the pluses? What are the limitations of each one of those things? The E stands for explore, which is kind of like, are we going to explore this conversation? Are we going to just try and come up with as many different solutions, insights, facts as necessary? And then the R is about resolving or sometimes deciding, right? Which is like, what's the decision that we need to make? And so it's getting really clear about what's the purpose or the purposes of the meeting. And I think that CIDR acronym really helps think about connect, inform, debate, explore, or resolve, because getting clear about that is so much more important than just saying, hey, let's talk about X.
Right. Yeah. So going back to your potential agenda topic of productivity, those are probably, you could probably take any of those approaches with that, right? So connect is like, well, what's your past experience with improving productivity? That's one type of connection. That's one thing you could be doing. But if you really need to resolve something, having somebody sit there and say, well, in my past job, I improved productivity by doing this, is probably not helpful, right? I mean, maybe it's a new idea for this organization, but that needs to be brought in a different way.
Yeah.
So,
right. And the participant in the meeting, if they aren't told that at the beginning of the meeting, they could be thinking they're being helpful when they're not. And so that's a call back on the leader to set that tone from the very beginning of what the purpose is for them to be there that day.
Do you guys see a big difference between these, in-person meetings, which we used to do all the time? Like we met in person, and if somebody was on the phone, that was a little weird. And they're just a plethora of Zoom or Teams or whatever it is meetings that we're having today, post-pandemic. What's the differences in what people need to do to lead those meetings effectively?
Yeah, I think that's one of our really interesting topics, because for the last several years, people have said, well, face-to-face meetings are much better than virtual meetings, and other people are like, no, working remotely is so much better than being face-to-face. And I think the reality is one's not better than the other; they're just different. They have advantages and disadvantages, and we would argue that almost everything that you can do in one form of meeting, you can do in the other. Right. And there are advantages and disadvantages to each one of those. Right. And so it's kind of like one of the complaints about the virtual is like, hey, we don't get to know people when we're breaking for coffee or whatever. And it's like, okay, that's great. And we can do some intentional, informal conversations where we get to know each other. Right. Or people say, well, it's tough to read the body language when we're virtual. Like, yes, that's true. And we can do instantaneous online polling of how people are feeling about issues, right? Or, people say, well, online, it's great because we can share screens like right away without even, having to worry about it. That's true. And in real life, we have shared file platforms where we can access stuff. So there's all these different things. And I think I may be wrong on this. We may be wrong on this, but we think that the only thing that you can't do that you can't do virtually that you can do in real life is hugging. And depending on who you are, that may or may not be a good thing. Right. So you decide.
Yeah. Some people are maybe just perfectly fine with that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There are definitely things that apply no matter what kind of meeting you're having, whether it's the hybrid type of meeting where you've got a mix of people in the room and a mix of people online, or if you've got all online, all in person. There's certain things that are just going to be across the board. You still want to have that agenda. You still want to establish roles. You want to be thinking about the correct tools to use in that meeting, which ones are going to be most impactful for what you're trying to accomplish. But then there are some things that you have to think about when you break it up. So for example, hybrid, when we ask people about feedback on the 3 different kinds of meetings they attend and what they see and all of that, there is a decent number of people out there experiencing hybrid meetings. And those are ones that can kind of cause a little discomfort for people if they haven't done it before. So one simple example, sometimes
by the way, let's define hybrid meetings, because that means different things to different people. So what do we mean?
Well, the way I'm defining it right now, this example is when you've got a mix of people some people are in the room physically together, and some people are coming in through their laptop or through a conference room. But either way, electronically, you see them on a screen somewhere. And so one challenge that happens is sometimes you'll have a group of maybe, say, 6 people that are online, and they're all on this big screen, but they're in a room together. And so you see them, they look like these tiny little people, right? Like, so they're real tiny, they're real small. You can't really tell what their expressions are. If they want to say something, it might be hard because they're so far away from the camera and all of that. So one quick suggestion is, instead of coming into that conference room and doing it, stay on your computers separately so we can see your faces. We can communicate with you. A little bit easier to see the body language than when everybody kind of is sucked back in that small room. One simple switch that you can make to make your hybrid meeting more effective. Another example is sometimes those people online get ignored or forgotten. And so just taking some time to intentionally, as the facilitators, make sure first of all that you're introducing everybody knows who's there, and that you're stopping to acknowledge the people who are online. So if they are trying to say something, are trying to give input, they're getting that recognition from you and that allowance from you to speak up when they need to as well. Just two small things that people can adjust, and it makes the meeting even more impactful.
Yeah, too often it turns into sort of there's two meetings happening simultaneously, and they're at different levels, right? In one role,
there's a real meeting, right? And then there's the other people who are talking to each other on mute.
Yeah,
right.
One place that I worked, I was always in the in-person meetings, and then I moved, and so I was then part of a remote member of the same weekly meeting. And I remember, like, the first time I was working remote, I got a chat message. It was a Zoom meeting. I got a chat from one of the colleagues saying, "Welcome to the cool kids," right? And so we've got this back channel of chat where we can talk about the stuff that's going on in the real meeting. And like the people who are in the face-to-face meeting in real life, they had a tendency to ignore and forget about the people who are in the background. And so there was this back channel conversation, and there was two meetings happening at two different levels, and it makes it really tough. And so, one of the themes that we share in this book is that really running meetings that don't suck is about awareness and respect. And it's awareness of everybody in the room and what they need to get and what their goals are from the meeting, and respecting everybody in the room so that we make sure that we hear from everybody. Everyone has the opportunity to participate equally, and we respect the fact that they need the opportunity to speak and to get their perspective and to get their needs met. So awareness and respect, I think, are really critical around running those things.
Yeah, I can see that. And it's just that awareness of the people who are not in the same space as you, whether it's physical, electronic. It's easy to lose that, particularly when you're focused on the activity that you're going through.
Yep.
And one of the things that I do, that I have a meeting that is frequently hybrid. And so there is somebody who is assigned to pay attention to the online folks and see if someone has a hand raised and see what's happening in the chat, and read out the chat. So the people, unless they're chatting privately to each other, the people know if they're in the chat, what they're saying in the chat is going to be shared with everybody. So I hope that helps with them feeling, included, and, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great suggestion. I don't know if that's like the virtual ombudsman or the ambassador to the virtual team, whatever, but somebody in the room who's paying attention, I think, is really important, because it's easy to forget about those people on the screen, those people someplace else.
Right. And simply another role that's established, right? So that person's role is different from the scribe, or different from the person who owns the material that they're talking about in that moment of the meeting. So setting those roles up ahead of time are helpful to people.
Yep.
That's you have so much more in the book, and I wish we had time to talk about it, but people should just go buy the book and read it themselves. So tell us again the name of the book. And
the book is
How to Make Meetings Not Suck.
There it is.
Right. How to Make Meetings Not Suck. So Jonathan, one more time, and you say it, because there we go.
Good. So How to Make Meetings Not Suck. And the subtitle is Tips and Tools to Run Effective Meetings. And in here, we talk about the skill set, the mindset, tools, tips, templates to make sure that meetings work more effectively. And we hope it's helpful for folks.
Yeah, I think it definitely is. So tell me, both of you, if people want to continue this conversation with you, what's the best way to find you?
I would suggest LinkedIn, because we're both on LinkedIn. We both have profiles there. And so it's easy to reach out that way. I don't know if Jonathan has a preference beyond LinkedIn. I'll let you throw your 2 cents in there as well.
LinkedIn is a great place to start. So we're there. We'd love to connect with folks. And we are fairly regularly putting in what we hope is value-added things through our posts that relate back to the book. So, you talked about the cost chart. We've posted that, and, other fun things too. So hopefully there's useful information there.
It's definitely useful. It's not just hopeful. So Cathi Brese Doebler and Jonathan Vehar on LinkedIn. Check them out. So let me ask you my famous final question.
Yes.
Which is, what is your one piece of advice for a young person starting out? So who wants to go first?
Jonathan, you get to go first this time.
I get to go. Oh, all right, fine. Good. I'm going to take the best answer then. I hope. For me, I think that the best piece of advice is to ask for feedback, right? Be very deliberate about asking for feedback, whether it's after each meeting or on a regular basis, and asking about 2 things. One is what's working well, and what are some things that I could do that would make it even better, right? We talk about it in the book is www.ebi. What's working well, and even better if. So what's working well, what's even better. And I think what's really critical about that is asking for feedback and being curious about what people have to say, not being defensive, not looking to like find out how awesome I am, but being curious about how I can take that to the next level. So feedback and curiosity are my two suggestions. My one suggestion.
Nice. Well, yeah, it's a double suggestion. I love it. Okay. And Cathi.
So a lot of times when we're new in our career, we're noticing people we admire and thinking, I want to be like them, or I want to emulate what they do. And that's wonderful. We should be paying attention to people who are doing things excellently and paying attention to how they do it well. At the same time, there's a balance there. As you grow in your career, you don't really want to copy other people. You want to be your own leader, your own whatever it is your job is. Own it yourself. So bring your own personality into whatever you do. Don't ever feel like you have to be exactly like somebody else that you admire, but just bring your own special uniqueness into all those situations and learn along the way.
I love that too. Yeah.
Answer. I want to revise my remarks.
I'm sorry. Too late. Can't do that. Right. Cathi Brese Doebler and Jonathan Vehar, thank you so much for traveling with me to the edges of lean.
It's a pleasure, Bella. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for inviting us. We really appreciate it.
This is Bella Engelberg, and I would like to thank Jonathan Vehar and Cathi Brese Doebler for joining me at the Edges of Lean. What did you learn from this conversation? What ideas did it spark? We would love to hear from you. Find Jonathan and Cathi on LinkedIn and their book wherever books are sold. Please find me on LinkedIn or at leanforhumans.com. Subscribe to the Edges of Lean. There's a lot to learn. Check out all the great lean content at leancommunicators.com, where you will get informative new content every single week. The Edges of Lean is written and produced by Bella Engelberg with support from Podcast Inc. This is a Lean for Humans production.